Yeah. Family, y'all. Just keep it tight, keep it tight, keep it tight. Oh, right. Yeah. Here we go.
So monasticism was important, but the other institution that was important at this time was the papacy. And we're going to start calling it the papacy now. Before this, we called him the Bishop of Rome, which he is and continues to be to this day. The Pope is the Bishop of Rome. But we have a new institution that's going to grow around him. We're going to call it the papacy. Papacy comes from a word, pope, and papacy come from a root, papa, which means father. Interesting that pope was a title for respected bishops. So even today, there are various bishops in the Eastern Church who have the title pope, not to be confused with the Pope in Rome, but their title is pope, meaning that they're a father of the people, in the same way that the abbot was to be a father. Abbot and pope, both from roots that mean father. So in this papacy then, Pope Gregory the Great is really one who's going to start bringing power to the Bishop of Rome, to the papacy we're going to start calling it. Who was Pope Gregory the Great? Lived from 540 to 604. He was elected by the people and reluctantly agreed to serve as Pope, and he just proved himself to be a very capable person. Organizing the distribution of food for the needy, rebuilding the military, rebuilding the aqueducts, negotiating peace with the Lombards, which would be an important task for a leader. And by default, he became the ruler of Rome, right? The Roman emperor, the emperor of the Roman Empire, has now moved to Constantinople. Who does that leave in Rome? No one. So now we have this person who's organizing and doing all of this, including rebuilding the military. He became the de facto emperor, if you will, the ruler of Rome. Rome would soon become known as St. Peter's Patrimony, which simply meant that there were some in the church who believed that Peter died in Rome. That was a long tradition, that Peter died in Rome. And so if the bones of Peter are there in Rome, and Peter, the tradition was that Peter died in Rome as well. Interesting, if Peter and Paul died in Rome, then Rome was this special center in the church. And so the patrimony of St. Peter would soon become the bishopric in Rome.
We were told by the guy in Rome that Peter was crucified with his head down right there on St. Peter's Square.
We'll never know unless anyone here was there. Unless we come across any photographs.
That's what
according to the tradition, St. Peter, they were going to crucify St. Peter, and according to the tradition, he said that he was not worthy to die in the same way as the Lord. So what did they do? They crucified him upside down. That's the tradition. And that's part of the richness that we have as a faith, right? We have many traditions that have come down to us today of these stories. In the 8th century, how interesting, there was a forged document which was called the Donation of Constantine. Constantine, where have you heard that name before? The emperor. What did the emperor donate? He donated Rome. To whom? To the church, according to this forged document. Which meant what? That in the 8th century, we discovered how it was that Constantine wanted Rome to belong to whom? To the Bishop of Rome, to the leaders of the church. How fascinating. What a great discovery that was when we found that document purportedly written by Constantine giving Rome to the Bishop of Rome, to the Pope at that point. So Gregory the Great saw himself as the Patriarch of the West, not as a universal authority, as Leo had done earlier. How interesting. Leo saw himself as head of the entire church. Wait a minute. Gregory realized how it was that there are many bishops here. He was the Bishop of Rome and the Patriarch of the West, in the same way that the Patriarch of the East was the Patriarch of Constantinople. So how interesting. We're starting to set up this tension now, where the church in the West is going to be centered in Rome, the church in the East is going to be centered in Constantinople. Both are going to be seen as the heads in their regions. What's going to happen then eventually? Eventually there's going to be a split between the two churches, definitively in 1054. There were different things that Gregory did that increased his authority. Whether or not he meant to increase his authority, these things certainly helped. He was instrumental in converting Visigoth Spain to Nicene Catholicism. How interesting. They were previously Arian. After they converted them to Orthodox Christianity, they fell under his rule, right? As Arians, they didn't follow his religion. As Orthodox Christians, they now follow his religion. He sent Augustine to England, extending the authority of the church and the authority of Rome to the British Isles. He was a prolific writer, which is why we call him today Gregory the Great. Gregory the Great wrote a lot. And he set aside St. Augustine of Hippo's doctrines of predestination and irresistible grace, and instead focused on satisfaction of sins through penance and absolution. What's going to happen? So if suddenly your focus becomes the satisfaction of your sins, great. We can tell anyone who comes to us, we'll say, those sins you committed, though they were terrible, horrible sins, the good news is you can make up for those sins through two things. By doing penance and by receiving absolution. Who does absolution come from? Priests. Ooh. So priests now become these powerful figures able to forgive sins or not to forgive sins, right? In the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 18, what you hold bound will be held bound. There's still priests in the Roman Catholic Church who see themselves as judges, right? Saying, I will forgive you or not. Saying, you've had an abortion? You know what? I'm not willing to forgive. There are priests who continue to look at this. So that was Pope Gregory the Great, who saw it as bolstering the role of priests and bishops in the absolution of sin and the satisfaction of sin through penance. You want to make up for your sins? I'll tell you what you can do to make up for your sins. Think of what's that going to do to raise the priest onto a certain pedestal, if you will, over the people, as setting the priest as judge over the people.